Hello everyone and welcome to the internally screening review of The Suicide Squad. No, not that one, the one that came out just recently. It is a sequel, maybe, to the smash hit Suicide Squad. Loved by some, hated by many. A massive, massive box office success for the DC franchise. But not one that really aged or sat well with a lot of people. For me, I was very, very interested in this film. This film was directed and written by James Gunn, who was neatly poached away from Marvel following his brief firing after a very, very strange campaign on the internet, very politically divided campaign. You can probably go and read about that somewhere. I'm not touching that with a fucking 100-foot barge pole. So he was poached. He's doing this film. He's obviously back with Marvel now. But this has been maybe one of the most confusing and intriguing and just completely baffling sequel rollouts I've ever seen. It is completely unclear. In an age where the canon of a franchise is so crucial and so important to the brand, I've never encountered a film where it's so completely unclear as to where a film stands in the canon of such a franchise.
True.
The trailers looked very strange, and I was excited to see just how strange this would end up being. And I'm sure you were the same, Adam. You a fan of James Gunn? Have you seen much of his stuff?
I have to say I'm a little bit unfamiliar with his back catalogue outside of the two Guardians films. I have, although, seen his excellent writing work in Scooby-Doo 1 and 2, which are absolute jams. He's always been a very funny, idiosyncratic cinematic voice, whether he's writing or directing or both. He has a very cartoonish sense of theatricality and fun. Everything he's made that I've seen or he's been part of has had this very vivid, brightly coloured aesthetic, and then this sort of incredibly fast-paced energy. And this film is no different in that regard. One thing I read coming into this was quoted from James Gunn himself was, "You don't get too attached to any characters," which put the fear of God into me, because something I should disclaim before we go further into this review is I have a little bit of a sort of phobia, which was exacerbated not necessarily just by this film, but by a film Rupert will know triggers me deeply, which is Deadpool 2, the famous X-Force scene, which shows a series of heroes joining forces and then having them all get killed in horrible and often incredibly grisly ways, but crucially accidentally. And that is a huge trigger for me. Accidental death in horror, in any kind of film, really fucks me up. And as soon as James Gunn said, these characters, you do not know who is going to die, but you know a lot of them are going to die. And I spent the whole film just like, oh God, what's going to happen next? And not to spoil it just yet, but out of the gate, this film does kind of put one right between your eyes in terms of setting the tone and kind of going, yeah, this is what's happening. This is the kind of outrageous, violent, hilarious, but incredibly sickening time that you're in for. It completely, tonally, if we're going to compare it back to the film it's trying not so much to follow on from, but to remedy the mistakes of, it is so much more appropriate of a Suicide Squad film than the 2016 one.
I was quite sort of interested to see, I'll spoil my opinion, I really enjoyed it, but part of why I was surprised to enjoy it is I actually felt it was quite in line with the original film in a lot of ways. It just did everything better, and what I appreciated the most about the film is I've only seen one James Gunn film outside of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, which I think are pretty good, and that's Slither, which is actually a really, really funny horror comedy.
I have been meaning to watch that.
That is a great one. If you're watching this and you've enjoyed The Suicide Squad, definitely check out Slither, because having seen Slither prior to this, I was excited to see him kind of get his genre director hat on again and see something gruesome, see something a bit more violent and a bit more funny, because crucially, as a Suicide Squad film, for those unaware, perhaps you're unaware, this film features Idris Elba, Margot Robbie, John Cena, who are all basically criminals. They're super villain criminals who have been locked up in the DC. They're not in Gotham, they're in some other government facility.
Yeah, they're
I think.
in like
and,
Bellevue or Belmarsh or something like that. I can't quite remember.
Some shit. And Viola Davis is a big, evil American agent who is going to send them on a suicide mission where they can't try and run away from it, or they'll get the chip in their head will blow up. There's really no point going into detail of the plot. This particular time, it's some pretend South American country, island thing.
Basically, a stand-in for Cuba, essentially.
It really doesn't matter. What you're there for is, character banter and ridiculous action scenes. And if I was to rate this film purely on the basis of the ridiculous action scenes, I'd have to just give it a 10, because I went in knowing it was going to be ridiculous, and I was fully expecting it and looking forward to it. But wow, it even kind of blew my expectations out of the water with just how silly and ridiculous and fun it was. The banter we can get to, the writing side of things, but let's be real. The most important thing is the fireworks. That's what everyone's there for, I feel.
Yeah.
That's what I was there for. I don't know about you. I was there to see people get chopped up.
Yes.
That was my prerogative.
Well, circling back to what I said earlier about like the gore and the violence, I guess, is there's a fairly sustained level of absolutely hideous violence throughout. Kind of hammer home the completely death-defying situation these people find themselves in. They're not just named the Suicide Squad, they are ready to die at any moment. In terms of like this sustained level of violence throughout, it lets up occasionally, allows me time to breathe and recover, but there's some really amazing set pieces. There's a particularly funny one I enjoyed where John Cena's character and Idris Elba's character, who both have very similar abilities, are trying to like outdo each other with the cleverness of their kills and the accuracy of what they're doing. There's this really nice like side-by-side shot of them walking in parallel, killing people at different points of the camera. That's an excellent bit. We build to this ridiculous crescendo at the end, which is very in keeping with a sort of traditional, what we've come to expect from, say, like a Marvel ending, where you've got like some giant beam or creature or army and you've got to defeat it.
Well, it felt very similar to the original Suicide
Yes,
Squad finale. Not completely, but in a way, it's a very similar promise.
Yes, but structurally very similar, but crucially, the twist is all in the execution and the style of it. I was kind of dreading it in some strange way, because I kind of like they end it off in a sort of quieter note. Before getting to the finale, there's a kind of a moment where the characters have to decide whether they basically continue on their journey or if they obey their commands and go home. And when they turn around and they go in to fight the big bad, I was like, this could be the film's downfall if it does this wrong. And mercifully, it nails it perfectly, and it's a really perfectly climactic way to end the film.
On a technical level as well, having seen Slither, I sort of have this new frustration with the Guardians films, because Slither is, kind of similarly violent, not quite to this extent. It's obviously like a much lower budget, lower scale, but it's like very, very violent and enjoyable and well made in that respect. And the action scenes in the Guardian films are just kind of okay. They're not brilliant, and I felt like there might have been something to do with maybe Marvel sort of holding back, because they have such a well implemented and enforced brand image that all of their films kind of have this very similar look, this very similar feel, similar styles of editing.
You definitely feel that most on Guardians 1, where like Guardians 2 is stylistically much more sort of has a gleeful abandon to it, whereas Guardians 1, whilst it does have James Gunn's voice in it, it's much more obedient to the Marvel formula. Yeah,
well, I was going to say, one of the best things about DC having kind of shat the bed and completely lost the superhero race, one of the benefits of that is they're actually willing to take a risk on something like this, because they're kind of throwing shit at the wall and see what sticks. And it looks like my frustration, my sort of post-Slither frustration with the Guardians films is kind of completely justified, because the action scenes in this are so much better than anything in the Guardians films. So much more exciting, more visceral, funny. They just got everything. Like, the action scenes in the Guardian films aren't bad. They're just not great either.
They're not
just
particularly
fine.
creative, whereas this film really shows what James Gunn can do when he's given that full power.
I think one of the things this film also did quite well is when you look at the original Suicide Squad, one of the first concessions I'll grant is this film is like the storyline and the characters still aren't brilliant. They just work better. The original Suicide Squad, none of the characters were likable, none of them were funny. The writing was like so slapped together.
It's very paper thin.
The writing is it was so paper thin, and it was trying to rely on a style over substance approach without having any style in the first place.
Yeah.
Whereas this has shit tons of style. It's still style over substance, but it's got like the bare minimum amount of substance. So like, for example, Idris Elba, his character is sort of like he's like just great with weapons. So he's basically reprising Will Smith's role, right?
Yeah.
And he has basically the same backstory as Will Smith's character Deadshot with his daughter. On paper, those two characters are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And there's really no reason that the Idris Elba character is better that you could show on paper. Because in this film, you literally get I think you genuinely just get 2 scenes that actually show his daughter. You get one right at the beginning, and you get one right at the end.
Yeah.
And that's it. But it actually it's not great, and like the character's not actually deep, but because Idris Elba is clearly being directed much better, and as an actor has a much better idea of the tone of the film that he's in, ends up being a much more convincing, more like lived-in feeling character.
Yeah.
The writing he's given is much better, which obviously helps. And even though the father-daughter relationship thing, for me, ultimately feels like... It does feel very secondary, but it just works better.
No, I agree. I completely agree. And if I might, I would quite like to go into spoilers now, because I think I want to talk a bit more about that. If you haven't watched Suicide Squad, I feel like if you're here watching this review, you probably have. But if not, it is one of the most bright and ridiculous superhero films.
We're both saying recommend, right?
Absolutely recommend it. Bish Bash Bosh. Spoiler time. Right. I think the thing that really solidifies Idris Elba's character in particular is his relationship with Ratcatcher 2. And again, it's only really kind of told across sort of a couple of scenes. But what it does is it helps solidify an earlier established character trait and transform it into like a character motivation. Rather than just going, here is character, and then have the cardboard cut out of that character just move from scene to scene and not really learn or establish anything. He goes from, this sort of cold, uncaring sociopath to someone who has someone to fight for, someone whose backstory really speaks to him, and they have a rapport, and suddenly this father-daughter relationship has a new context to live in. And his mission no longer becomes, I need to get through this for my own gain, but to protect and help someone else, much like my daughter, who is lost in the world and is really in need of a father figure. And that's a simple but beautifully effective and efficient storytelling
it gets the job
method.
done.
It really grounds that character. It makes the character feel lived in. It makes the character feel cared about by the writers. And I think that kind of attention to detail is present throughout most of the characters in the film. I was thinking, so many characters die in this film. I was thinking, there's a kind of rule of thumb in horror or action, or whenever a character dies, is that there's an end to a character's arc, and then once that arc is finished, a character is allowed to die. Now obviously there are plenty of disposable non-characters that kind of go early, but even then I think they do good jobs with these arcs.
Everyone has a mini arc. Even if it's really small, it's at least there for the most part.
I think that say John Cena and Joel Kinnaman's character, they're kind of two sides of the same coin in some ways. One is an actual patriot who has fought for his country, and one is someone who idolizes patriotism but exploits it negatively and uses it as an excuse for evil. And they have a fight at the end, big spoiler, in John Cena killing Joel Kinnaman's character. There's that moment where he says, "Peacemaker, what a joke." And in a genuinely quite restrained and well acted moment, John Cena has this genuinely anguished look on his face as he's killed someone he idolizes deeply, and there's this kind of understanding of what he's done is evil, but he still can't stop himself.
I actually thought those two were actually really good in the film.
Oh, absolutely.
They were maybe two of my favourite. The arc you're talking about is a really interesting one. It has a really cool conclusion, and that moment is amazing. But I do feel like maybe I missed it, but do you not think like there could have been more set up with that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I do agree.
It does kind of feel like it comes in that final sequence.
So in terms of John Cena playing the double agent, I guess, yeah, there's not really much of that. He is just following the group until he isn't. And I will agree, maybe that bit could have been more subtly introduced throughout. Coming back to what you said about those performances, diving into the performance side for a bit, I was not expecting, I mean, no one really particularly expects good things from wrestler turned actor.
Well, it's changing though, isn't it? James Gunn's good with him. He got Batista in Guardians, and
That's very true.
So
that's very true.
Maybe this is his hidden talent. I think James Gunn should do a whole film with just wrestlers.
So what he should get? Oh my God! So the triple threat of John Cena, Batista, and Dwayne The Rock. Maybe some unknowns as well, just to have a full cast.
Like revive Hulk Hogan's career.
Oh my
Get
word.
like Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns was in Hobbs and Shaw for like 1 second.
Right.
You can get like a bunch of I don't know any other wrestlers.
No, I mean,
I don't know.
I'm not very good on
The
that
Undertaker that's a wrestler, right?
That's a wrestler, I think. Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily expect, and what little I've seen of John Cena acting before has been very, just standard, not terrible, but completely average. And in this, he's got a great sense of humor to him, great comic timing, and when he needed to, in that moment, genuinely convincing anguish. And similarly, Joel Kinnaman, who I thought was dull as fucking dishwater in the original Suicide Squad film, hasn't excited me outside of this at all, came through with a incredibly charismatic performance.
I was really impressed with John Cena, particularly because I'm aware of one of his big things around him as a person and him as a wrestler is that he's been kind of hated in the wrestling community for a long time because he only wants to play the good guy.
Always
basically.
the good guy, yeah.
And like in a lot of films, that's most of the films he's done, he's played the good guy. So I guess recently with F9 and now with this, Peacemaker is like a very villainous character. He's like a real bastard. And he's like killing people in some horrific ways in this film. So I was like, it was really cool. And I think it actually suits him much better.
Do you remember the bit where he walks past the dude
and he's got like the hatchet and he's like...
Yeah, that was
great. Just absolutely sushis him. Yeah, that was awesome. I was taken aback because I'm not all that familiar with wrestling. I don't know much about John Cena, but I do know like that is kind of the public persona he projects. And,
it's kind of...
I think actually the villainous role suits him much better. It suits his face, I think.
Well, I mean, a man that huge is inherently menacing because he's so powerful looking. It doesn't matter how roided up he is. That kind of image perfectly suits these movies. It harks back to the days of a young Arnie in Terminator, like a huge mountain is inherently intimidating.
I loved the line between him and Idris Elba where he was like, it doesn't matter what you do, it's how dope you make it look. And then Idris Elba turns around and he just goes, fuck, he's right. It was just such a stupid fucking piece of dialogue.
That's true.
It was like so... I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was just like so dumb.
I'll tell you what,
that was awesome.
I like that they let Idris Elba use his real fucking accent in this film. That was nice.
Yeah, Idris, true. Although Idris Elba, you could cast him in any accent, he'll kill it.
It kind of goes without saying that Idris is great in this film, even in the worst of films, thinking of Hobbs and Shaw, I still found him hilarious and like charismatic and probably like the best bit of that
charming.
Film. I really love the guy, I don't know his name unfortunately, the guy that plays Polka Dot Man. Shout out to Polka Dot Man.
The guy who was in The Dark Knight.
Yeah, as the crazy guy, right?
He's also in a bunch of... I think he's in at least 1 or 2 Denis Villeneuve films as well.
Oh, so really? Oh, tight.
Yeah,
he's one of those actors you see everywhere, but you don't... He's never significant enough for you to really put the name to the face. But this is probably one of his most significant, like, in terms of the bill roles. And good on him. He's a great actor. He does the kind of nerdy psychopath very well. Oh, he was in Prisoners, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he was
in
fucking
Prisoners.
nutter in that. He's great.
I'll also say I was absolutely dreading Margot Robbie just because I didn't really like the Birds of Prey film. I get that her character is really popular and she has to be a big part of the film.
Yeah.
And I found her in Suicide Squad. I mean, she was like by far the most committed performance, but which kind of led to her either being the best part or the worst part by a mile in any given scene that she was in.
Right.
I'm not a Harley Quinn fan. I don't know. I agree.
I think of all of the humor and comedy that comes out of this film. Not all of it lands as a blanket statement, I think.
Yeah, it's a mix with some of it. It's a
bit spotty.
Some of it misses.
Having seen it twice though, first time I was like, I found it entertaining, but the comedy was by far and away my least favorite aspect of it. I just didn't think it really was that funny. But watching it with you and another friend of ours, it was by far and away funnier. And I think that social aspect, that kind of giggling with mates at what the ridiculous things you're seeing on screen, that definitely helped it. But when it comes to Harley Quinn, I've always found her annoying. I think that's an opinion we both share. And that's not really shade on Margot Robbie, because I think it's just the inherent nature of the character.
I think she plays the character perfectly well. I think the problem is with the character. But I actually thought, I was very pleasantly surprised to find I liked her in the film. She was still like quite annoying and unfunny in scenes, but like she actually had something to do. She had a great action scene.
Oh, great action scene.
I was kind of worried like she would be like the biggest part of the film, and like they were going to just like, it was just going to be a ton of Harley Quinn, and I was going to get sick of it. But yeah, I think they did it really well.
Yeah. Focusing on Idris's character was the correct choice. There's the great action scene that Harley Quinn has, and then the kind of strangely tender moment where she talks about like living through abuse in an admittedly kind of cartoonish setting, but that is a rare moment where we see proper character development from her. Because when I was saying earlier about everyone having their arc, I would say one character that doesn't really get that so much is Harley Quinn, because her character doesn't exist just in this film. I think her character exists in this far more in the universe of DC than she does just here. And I think that arc kind of doesn't really finish here. It's clearly still going.
I don't really get where Birds of Prey fits in. If it goes Suicide Squad, Birds of Prey, this.
I think that is it.
If you're trying to follow her storyline, it's going to make no fucking sense.
In terms of character progression, no.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. I think the best way to go into this is just basically as like an alternative universe standalone film where some of your characters are there for some reason. It just don't think about it. Yeah, I think maybe the only thing this film really lacked for me character-wise was a good villain. There are like a couple of villains. You got Peter Capaldi, who doesn't really do much in the film, to be honest.
He has one good villain speech where he unleashes his full like thick of it. He just fully comes out with that.
I wish they'd have done more with him. He didn't really stick in my mind much, to be honest.
No.
And you have the dictator guy who is a bit of a nothing character on purpose. His bit's fine. He's not really meant to be the main villain. Yeah. You can probably guess that he's not pretty quickly. And then you have Viola Davis, who I was really hoping they'd do more with, because she's such a great actor, and she was definitely one of the best parts of the original Suicide Squad, and I felt like she was a little bit underused, and she really is the main villain.
Yes.
So I was a little bit disappointed with what they did with her.
Probably maybe saving it up for a sequel, but I don't know if this film's going to be successful enough thanks to the COVID situation. Doesn't seem to have done brilliantly box office wise, but neither did Black Widow, so it's a strange metric to be going off of at the moment.
I mean, who knows? But yeah, and I like the starfish thing. It was just so stupid. It was great. But like, the film didn't really, and I guess this was a similar problem with the original Suicide Squad, which in a way is why I feel like this film feels quite tonally faithful to the original Suicide Squad. Because once again, you got a fucking no real villain, like they do in that one.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I do think we should address two pivotal scenes. I want to talk about the very beginning action scene and the very last action scene. I alluded to it earlier, and I feel like I need to address it for my own personal therapy and catharsis. I went to see this film before Rupert, and I kind of came out and told him, this is what you have to expect, and how much it shat me up, for want of a better word. And when we went to see it together, I fully expected you to just be watching my face the entire film, seeing how I was dealing with it. Because with the opening, you have a genius red herring, essentially, where...
Well, it's basically the opening scene to Saving Private Ryan, but with a weasel.
Right! We hadn't even said that to each other, but I was... Fuck, I was thinking the exact same fucking thing. Essentially, much like the Deadpool 2 scene I was talking about, you're bringing together this new Suicide Squad, and they, with all this fresh faces and interesting, colourful new characters, they do their walk on with the music, and they drop in Harley Quinn and Flag just so the ruse works and you don't think they're all just immediately going to die. But then, lo and behold, they get fucking annihilated in truly sickeningly violent ways.
Helicopter blades was the highlight for me. I mean,
I'm sure there's plenty of people.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome.
I'm sure there's plenty of American viewers that were grateful to see Pete Davidson. I'm sure lots of people were grateful to see him with his entire face blown off. That was grim. That kicks it all off. Then a bunch of people get minced by a helicopter, and Jai Courtney, a huge part of the original, gets fucking annihilated, like completely obliterated by both trees and a helicopter alike. He gets maybe the most violent death of anyone in the film.
Well, the best part of that scene was Detachable Man.
Detachable Kid.
Detachable Kid, that's it. That was probably the best joke in the whole film for me.
Well, you're expecting this amazing, like, superpower, like, oh, maybe he's got
Well, no, it was more
hands.
him, like, where they're shooting his hands, and then it's just him, but it's just his torso,
he's writhing around,
head and legs writhing on the floor. Like, that was hilarious. That was so funny.
That's great. The suddenness and the absolute chaos of all these people dying so incredibly rapidly, one after the other, in intensely graphic ways, is the exact kind of scene that will make me the borderline of vomiting. Thankfully, I've seen it twice. I haven't been sick, much to Rupert's disappointment, I'm sure. But I just wanted everyone to know how much I personally suffered through that ordeal. And then we finally come on to the Starfish, Starro the Destroyer, who...
That was great.
How dare he take out my boy Polka Dot Man like that?
Yeah, that was sad. But you know what you said earlier, you know, the moment the character arc is done.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
they're free game to be killed. And I could see from the framing of that shot where he's about to die that you get about like 2 or 3 seconds where he says, I'm a superhero. And I was like, right, he's going to 3, 2, 1, and then, then it happens. I mean, it sucks because he's a great character, but I don't know how much mileage they were going to get out of Polka Dot Man.
No, I know.
But he was fantastic. He was a great character.
I think the thing that's sad is, like, there's so much sympathy the audience has for him. Even though he's often described as the craziest one there, he has such a peace, like a kind of quietness to him, like a fragility, that is played far more sympathetically than it is just for like laughs or to gawk at. His power is often laughed at, but then the backstory behind it with his abusive mother and him just like always being haunted by her memory. Again, they show it in a silly way, but it does have heart to it. And I've seen across the internet people aligning and sympathizing with that character and wishing for more, because you feel sorry for him. And so when he gets this grand moment of elation, it's like snatched away from him. But he dies in a moment of happiness. So it giveth in one hand and it taketh with the other. So
it does. James Gunn is a cruel, cruel mistress.
And the inside of an alien starfish's eyeball being eaten out by a swarm of thousands upon thousands of rats was hilariously gruesome. Just like...
Yeah, very disgusting.
As someone put it on the letterbox, the true sequel to Ratatouille we never knew we were getting.
Yeah, there you go. There was a lot more rats in this film than I was expecting.
Yeah.
But can't be disappointed with it. So... What would you rate it?
I would give this film a solid 7 out of 10. Although, having said that, us talking about it now is making me appreciate it more and more. It's a film I've already seen twice and I'm looking forward to watching again. I think it's a great one to watch other people watch because it's so shocking, so much incredibly extravagant action and violence. Like it's a real, as Scorsese would put it, a true roller coaster ride. So yeah, 7 out of 10, but with room to go higher.
Yeah, I would say don't go into this expecting anything like Guardians of the Galaxy, because where those films,
no,
the strength of those films is the characters and the the heart of the film. Not to say this film doesn't have any characters at heart, but the strength of those films are the characters and the heart, and the themes of like a made family and trauma with your parents and all these kind of things. You get this in this film, but it really does take a backseat to James Gunn having all the toys out of the toy box, smashing them into each other and ripping them apart. If you're like me and you're a bit of a sick fuck and you like to see stuff get minced, this is one of the as far as Hollywood offerings go, the best that we've seen since forever.
Yeah.
And this is, I guess it's more in the vein of a Deadpool, but I'd take this over Deadpool pretty much any day of the week. So yeah, 7 out of 10. Definitely room to improve, mostly just because I think a lot of the comedy doesn't land for me. Yeah, I would definitely watch it again for sure. I would recommend it to action film fans. Definitely need to see this. Horror fans need to see this, and superhero fans, to be honest, they're probably slightly lower down on the list compared to those two. I'd actually recommend it to those other sort of genre camps first, because it kind of feels much more in line with those. But yeah, that's James Gunn's Suicide Squad. That's The Suicide Squad, which, by the way, is a title I hate, but I also kind of like as a very sort of subtle flex,
like passive aggressive,
to imply the previous film is a Suicide Squad.
It's not
this is the Suicide Squad. But when you're talking about the two films, it is going to be
completely impossible.
A fucking nightmare to distinguish these from each other in a casual conversation. But yeah, James Gunn's Suicide Squad. We rate it 7 out of 10 both, because we are perfectly in sync as human beings. And yeah, I recommend it. If you made it this far, smash like, subscribe, Internally Screaming. Also check out Splash Zone Gamers. Also check out Tasteless Reviews. We're Internally Screening. I'm Adam.
I'm Rupert.
Peace out, bitches.
We forgot to talk about King Shark.